The day you forget your pride, God will begin to act. There are moments when you look at your life and nothing seems openly broken, yet something feels deeply misaligned. You pray, you believe, you stay disciplined, you keep showing up, and still, there is a quiet tension inside you, a sense that God feels distant, slow, or silent, not absent, just unresponsive. That tension is not random. It is not weakness. It is not failure. It is often the signal that something good has slowly taken the place of something essential. Many people think pride announces itself loudly, but the most dangerous pride is quiet. It wears responsibility like a badge. It hides behind maturity, competence, and strength. It whispers, "I've got this," instead of, "Lord, I need you." And when that shift happens, God does not step away. He waits. He waits because love never competes for control. Love waits for trust to return. This message is not for people who have rejected God. It is for people who are tired of carrying what God never asked them to carry. It is for those who feel spiritually active but inwardly dry. For those who have been strong for too long. For those who have prayed with effort instead of surrender. If that is you, this is not a correction meant to shame you. It is an invitation meant to free you. Something changes when pride loosens its grip. Not noise, not drama, alignment. And when alignment returns, God does not hesitate to act. When doing everything right still feels wrong. You followed the principles, you stayed consistent. You avoided what you were supposed to avoid and did what you were taught to do. From the outside, your faith looks solid. From the inside, something feels off. There is a quiet frustration you rarely admit, a question that keeps surfacing when no one is listening. Why does this still feel heavy if I am doing everything right? That question is more spiritual than you realize. Because faith is not measured by correctness, it is measured by closeness. You can obey God and still drift from intimacy with Him. You can honor His commands while unconsciously trusting your own strength more than His presence. This is where many sincere believers get stuck, not in sin, but in self-reliance. Psalm after psalm reveals a pattern. God is near to the brokenhearted, not the efficient, not the composed, not the ones who have it together. Nearness responds to openness, not performance. When doing everything right starts to feel wrong, it is often because effort has replaced dependence. You are still walking but no longer leaning. There is a difference between discipline and control. Discipline says, "I choose God daily." Control says, "I need to manage outcomes so I feel safe." Control slowly hardens the heart without us noticing. It teaches us to trust plans, patterns, and preparation more than presence. And God, in His mercy, allows discomfort to surface so we notice the shift. That discomfort is not punishment, it is invitation. It is God saying, "You are carrying what I never asked you to carry. You are striving where I called you to trust." When faith becomes heavy, it is often because pride has taken the weight that surrender was meant to hold. This is where the journey truly begins. Not with doing less, but with yielding more. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. The next question becomes unavoidable. If something has quietly replaced God's voice, what is it, and how did it happen? The inner voice that replaced God's guidance. There is a moment when guidance quietly shifts. Not overnight, not rebelliously. It happens slowly, through repetition. You start consulting your experience before you consult God. You trust your instincts because they have worked before. You lean on what you know because uncertainty feels irresponsible, and without realizing it, the voice you hear most often is no longer God's. It is your own. This is not arrogance. It is familiarity. Familiarity with yourself. Familiarity with your patterns. Familiarity with outcomes you have learned to manage. The problem is not that you think. God gave you a mind. The problem begins when thinking replaces listening. When reasoning speaks first and prayer becomes confirmation instead of conversation. Scripture shows us again and again that God's people get into trouble not when they stop believing, but when they stop asking. When Israel moved only after the cloud, they stayed aligned. When they moved because it made sense, they wandered. God's guidance often contradicts efficiency. It slows us down. It unsettles our certainty. It asks us to trust timing instead of strategy. The inner voice feels safer because it is predictable. God's voice feels risky because it requires surrender. That is why pride does not always sound loud. Sometimes it sounds calm, logical, and responsible. It says, "I know how this ends. I know what to do. I have been here before." And slowly, dependence turns into autonomy. The Psalms reveal a different posture, a heart that pauses, a soul that waits, a voice that says, "Lead me, even when I think I know the way." That kind of prayer feels vulnerable. It admits limitation. It allows God to interrupt plans, not just bless them. When your inner voice replaces God's guidance, spiritual sensitivity dulls. You still pray, but you decide first. You still read scripture, but you filter it through preference. You still worship, but you no longer listen in silence. And silence is where God often speaks loudest. The moment you notice this shift is not a moment of guilt. It is a moment of grace, because awareness is the doorway back to alignment. Once you realize whose voice has been leading, a deeper question emerges. If confidence has grown this strong, could it be quietly standing where God once stood? How confidence becomes a wall instead of a door. Confidence is celebrated. We are taught to build it, protect it, project it. And in many ways, confidence is a gift. It allows you to move forward, to take responsibility, to endure pressure without collapsing. But there is a moment when confidence stops being a doorway and starts becoming a wall. Not because confidence is wrong, but because it begins to replace dependence. When confidence is rooted in God, it remains open, it listens, it yields, it adapts. But when confidence is rooted in self, it hardens. It stops asking, it stops waiting, it starts assuming. And assumptions quietly remove God from the center while still keeping Him in the language. This is where pride becomes difficult to detect. You are not exalting yourself above others. You are simply trusting yourself more than you trust God. You move faster than you pray. You explain before you seek. You decide before you discern. And over time, confidence stops inviting God in and starts keeping Him at a distance. The Psalms speak often about refuge, not strength, about shelter, not certainty. David was confident, but his confidence was never self-contained. It was always leaning, always crying out, always returning. That posture kept his heart soft, even when his calling was strong. Confidence becomes a wall when it no longer allows interruption. When God can bless your plans, but not alter them. When He can affirm your direction, but not redirect it. That is when spiritual stagnation begins. Not because God stopped moving, but because humility stopped making space. You can feel this wall emotionally. Prayer feels repetitive. Worship feels distant. Decisions feel heavy. You carry a constant pressure to get it right because the outcome feels dependent on you. That pressure is not from God. God does not motivate through weight. He leads through peace. The moment you realize confidence has turned into a wall is not meant to break you, it is meant to open you, because walls can come down, and when they do, God does not rush in with judgment. He steps in with direction. But before direction can return, another layer must be exposed. What happens when you believe you always need the answer? The invisible burden of always having the answer. There is a quiet pressure that grows when people begin to rely on you. When situations turn complicated, when decisions feel heavy, when outcomes seem to depend on your response, you feel the need to be certain, to be composed, to know what to do next. At first, this feels like maturity. Over time, it becomes a burden no one sees but you. Always having the answer feels noble, but it slowly isolates the soul. It trains you to suppress questions instead of bringing them to God. You stop admitting confusion because confusion feels like weakness. You stop waiting because waiting feels irresponsible. And before long, faith becomes something you manage rather than something you live inside of. The Psalms are filled with questions, honest ones, unfiltered ones. Why, Lord? How long? Where are you? Those questions are not signs of spiritual immaturity. They are signs of trust. Because only someone who believes God is present dares to speak honestly to him. Pride, on the other hand, keeps questions internal. It convinces you that you should already know. This invisible burden affects more than your thoughts. It affects your emotions. Peace becomes fragile. Joy becomes conditional. Rest feels unearned. You carry tension into prayer because prayer feels like another responsibility instead of a refuge. When you always need the answer, you rarely experience rest. God never asked you to be the source. He asked you to be the vessel. When you confuse the two, exhaustion follows. That exhaustion is not a sign that you are failing God. It is a sign that you are doing His work without His strength. There is freedom in admitting, "I don't know," not because it lowers you, but because it repositions you. It moves you from center stage back into the presence of God, where direction is given, not demanded. And once that pressure lifts, another truth becomes clear. God is not waiting for better answers from you. He is waiting for something else entirely. Why God often waits for the last word to leave us. Silence feels uncomfortable because it removes our sense of control. When God does not respond the way we expect, our instinct is to fill the space. We explain, we justify, we negotiate. We replay prayers in different forms, hoping the right words will unlock movement. But God is rarely waiting for better language. He is often waiting for quiet. There is a difference between praying and talking over God. Prayer becomes crowded when we are more focused on being understood than on listening. The Psalms show moments where words fall short and stillness becomes the language of trust. Be still does not mean do nothing. It means stop resisting what God is trying to reveal. God waits for the last word to leave us because the last word is usually the one that protects our pride. It is the final explanation, the final defense, the final attempt to maintain control while still asking for help. As long as that word remains, surrender stays incomplete. This waiting is not passive, it is purposeful. God is not withholding direction to test patience. He is creating space for alignment. Alignment happens when the heart stops arguing with truth, when we no longer need to convince God or ourselves, when silence becomes consent. Emotionally, this feels like exposure. Without words, we face what we have been avoiding: our fears, our need to be right, our discomfort with not knowing. Yet this is where intimacy deepens. God speaks most clearly when the soul is unguarded. When the last word leaves, peace enters first. Not answers, peace. That peace prepares the heart to receive what comes next, because once the inner noise quiets, another realization surfaces. Faith may still be present, but something else might have quietly taken its place. The day faith becomes performance without us noticing. Faith does not turn into performance all at once. It happens gradually, quietly, almost respectfully. You keep praying, you keep serving, you keep showing up. Nothing looks wrong on the outside, but on the inside, something subtle shifts. You begin to measure your faith by consistency instead of connection, by activity instead of intimacy. Performance feels productive, it gives structure, it gives a sense of progress. But performance slowly replaces presence when the heart starts working for approval instead of resting in relationship. You begin to ask yourself questions you never meant to ask. Am I doing enough? Am I being faithful enough? Am I maintaining the standard? Those questions seem spiritual, but they hide a deeper fear. What if I stop doing and something falls apart? The Psalms were never written from a stage. They were written from caves, fields, and broken places. David did not perform for God. He poured himself out before him. That is why his words still carry life. They came from hunger, not obligation. From desperation, not image. When faith becomes performance, worship becomes effort. Prayer becomes repetition. Scripture becomes reference instead of encounter. You are still doing holy things, but your soul feels distant. And the most confusing part is this: you cannot explain what changed because nothing visibly did. God does not reject your discipline. He invites you deeper than it. He is not impressed by consistency when consistency replaces surrender. He desires truth in the inner being, not maintenance of appearances. Performance keeps you busy, presence makes you alive. This realization can feel uncomfortable because it removes the illusion of control. It asks you to stop hiding behind routines and step back into vulnerability, to be seen, not evaluated, known, not measured. And once performance loosens its grip, another tension surfaces. Because if faith is no longer something you manage, then what happens when control steps in to take its place? What breaks first? When control replaces trust. Control promises safety, but it delivers pressure. The moment control takes the place of trust, something inside you begins to fracture. Not all at once, quietly, subtly. The first thing to break is peace. You still believe God is good, but your mind never rests. You replay conversations. You rehearse outcomes. You plan for every possible scenario, not because you lack faith, but because you fear vulnerability. Trust rests. Control monitors. Trust releases. Control tightens. When control leads, clarity fades. Decisions feel heavier because everything feels dependent on you. Prayer becomes anxious because surrender feels risky. You still invite God in, but only after you have calculated the safest path. The Psalms speak of a soul at rest, not because circumstances are calm, but because trust has settled. When control replaces trust, that rest disappears. Your body feels it. Your thoughts race. Your emotions stay alert even in still moments. This is not spiritual strength. It is spiritual strain. Sensitivity breaks next. You become less responsive to God's subtle nudges, not because he stops speaking, but because control demands certainty. God often whispers. Control needs guarantees. Over time, you stop noticing small convictions, gentle redirections, quiet warnings. Everything has to make sense before you move. Control also isolates. You carry the weight alone because delegation feels dangerous, dependence feels like weakness, and slowly, the joy of faith is replaced with the responsibility of leadership, even if no one appointed you to lead. God never intended faith to feel this heavy. When control takes over, it reveals something important. Beneath the need to manage is a fear of surrender. And fear does not disappear by being ignored. It must be faced. That fear has a name, and it points directly to the next question. What are you afraid God might do if you let go? The fear of letting God lead what we built. There is a fear that rarely gets named out loud. It is not the fear that God will abandon you. It is the fear that God might redirect you. That if you truly surrender, he may touch the very things you worked hard to build. Your plans, your identity, your sense of progress, the structure that makes you feel safe. This fear does not come from rebellion. It comes from investment. You prayed while building. You believed while constructing. You thanked God for the strength to endure. And now the thought of releasing control feels like risking everything you became in the process. Pride often hides here, not as arrogance, but as protection. The Psalms reveal a different posture. They show people who built nothing permanent without God leading every step. A heart that says, "Search me, Lord, even if what you find changes me." That prayer feels dangerous because it is honest. It admits that what you built may need to be reordered. Letting God lead does not mean he will destroy what you built. It means he will refine what cannot sustain you. God is not interested in undoing your life. He is interested in aligning it. But alignment requires trust, and trust requires release. When you name this fear, something shifts. You realize surrender is not about losing yourself, it is about finally resting. And when that fear loosens, the heart becomes unguarded. That unguarded place is where God speaks differently. How God speaks differently to the unprotected heart. When the heart is guarded, God's voice feels distant, not because he is far, but because protection filters perception. A protected heart listens for reassurance. An unprotected heart listens for truth. That difference changes everything. Protection often sounds wise. It tells you to stay alert, stay composed, stay in control. It teaches you to brace yourself emotionally so disappointment does not hurt as much. Spiritually, that posture creates distance, not rebellion. Distance. God speaks most clearly where there is openness, not armor. The Psalms reveal this pattern again and again. God responds to the honest cry, not the polished one. He moves toward the exposed soul, not the defended position. When the heart is unprotected, prayer changes tone. You stop explaining and start confessing. Not sin alone, but fear, fatigue, confusion. You stop asking God to fix outcomes and start asking Him to search you. An unprotected heart notices subtle things. A quiet nudge, a pause before a decision, a discomfort that feels like guidance. Pride dulls sensitivity because it needs certainty. Humility sharpens it because it allows mystery. God rarely shouts. He leads through awareness, not pressure. This kind of listening feels vulnerable. It removes the illusion of control. It requires trust without guarantees, yet it brings a different kind of safety. Not the safety of knowing what will happen, but the safety of knowing who is leading. When protection falls away, God does not overwhelm you. He steadies you. He does not rush instructions. He restores alignment, and in that alignment, something unexpected appears. Strength returns, but it looks different than before. The quiet strength that appears after surrender. There is a kind of strength that does not announce itself. It does not rush. It does not prove. It does not defend. It simply stands. This strength appears after surrender, not before it. And it feels unfamiliar at first because it is not fueled by adrenaline or pressure. It is sustained by trust. Before surrender, strength feels tense. You brace yourself. You prepare for impact. You stay alert so nothing catches you off guard. After surrender, strength becomes steady. You no longer need to control every outcome to feel secure. You are anchored, not because life is predictable, but because God is present. The Psalms describe this strength as a soul that is calm, like a weaned child. Not helpless, not passive, content. No longer frantic for reassurance, no longer driven by the need to prove maturity. This is what humility produces. Not weakness, but stability. This strength changes how you respond. You listen longer before reacting. You pause before deciding. You are not hurried by fear or flattered by urgency. You move when peace leads, not when pressure demands. That is the difference. Pride rushes. Surrender discerns. Emotionally, this strength heals fatigue. You stop carrying the weight of outcomes that were never yours. Spiritually, it restores confidence, not confidence in yourself, but confidence in God's faithfulness. You trust that obedience matters more than results and alignment matters more than speed. This is why surrender does not shrink you, it centers you. It returns you to a posture where God can work through you without resistance. And when that happens, something quietly begins to shift around you. Not with noise, not with announcements, but with movement that does not need permission from you to begin. Because when surrender settles in the heart, God does not delay. He starts to act, often before you even realize it. When God begins to act without announcing it, God rarely begins with spectacle. He begins with alignment. While you are waiting for a sign that proves movement, He is already rearranging the unseen. Conversations shift, desires recalibrate, resistance softens, not dramatically, but decisively. This is how God acts when pride has stepped aside. He does not ask permission. He does not explain Himself. He simply moves. This can be confusing because we are trained to recognize change only when it is loud. We expect clarity to arrive fully formed. We look for confirmation before peace. But God often reverses the order. He gives peace first, then understanding later. Action begins internally before it ever becomes visible externally. The Psalms reflect this rhythm. God restores the soul before He restores the situation. He steadies the heart before He straightens the path. When God begins to act, your reactions change before your circumstances do. You respond with calm where you once reacted with fear. You wait without anxiety where you once rushed. That is movement. That is evidence. This is why humility accelerates God's work. Not because humility earns favor, but because it removes resistance. Pride delays because it negotiates. Surrender releases because it trusts. When you stop managing outcomes, God starts directing steps. You may not even notice it at first. Others might before you do. They sense a difference in your tone, your patience, your presence. The urgency is gone. The striving has softened. That is not passivity. That is alignment. And once God begins acting this way, the temptation returns. The temptation to step back in, to reclaim control, to move faster than peace allows. That is why the next lesson is not about starting well, but about staying where God has placed you, even when pride urges you forward again. Learning to stay where pride once pushed you forward. There is a pressure that returns when things begin to feel stable again. Not chaos, not confusion, but momentum. Momentum can be dangerous when it tempts you to move faster than God's peace. Pride rarely pushes you backward. It pushes you ahead of timing. It whispers, now that things are calmer, you can take it from here. Staying is harder than starting. Waiting is harder than acting, especially when you have spent years proving you can endure, build, and push through. Yet the discipline of faith is not only knowing when to move, but knowing when to remain. The Psalms often speak of dwelling, abiding, staying under the shadow, not rushing beyond it. Learning to stay means resisting the urge to reclaim control once relief arrives. It means allowing God to define pace, not just direction. Pride urges progress without presence. Trust chooses presence even when progress feels slow. This is where many people lose what they were just given, not because God withdraws, but because they step ahead. Staying requires attentiveness. You learn to listen again, to sense when peace is leading and when impatience is speaking. You stop confusing urgency with obedience. You let God complete what He started instead of rushing to manage the results. This posture feels unfamiliar at first. It challenges the identity built around productivity and strength. But it produces something deeper. Rest without guilt, movement without anxiety, confidence without pressure. When you learn to stay, faith matures. It becomes less about achieving outcomes and more about walking in rhythm with God. And when that rhythm settles, something profound happens. Change completes itself without force, without noise, without effort. It arrives quietly, exactly when pride no longer needs to announce it. The moment everything changes without making noise. Finally, there is a moment that does not feel like a breakthrough, yet everything is different. No rush of emotion, no dramatic sign, just a deep sense of rightness settling in your spirit. The striving is gone. The tension has lifted. You are no longer asking God to prove Himself, because trust has replaced the need for certainty. This is the moment pride fully loosens its grip. Not because you fought it, but because you no longer need it. You are not smaller. You are aligned. You are not weaker. You are rested. God's presence feels close again, not because circumstances improved, but because resistance ended. The Psalms describe this as still waters, not excitement, but restoration. The soul is no longer bracing for impact. It is held, and in that holding, clarity arrives naturally. You know what to do next, not because you forced an answer, but because peace made space for wisdom. God has been ready to act long before you notice the shift. He waited patiently, not for perfection, but for surrender. The day you forget your pride is not the day you lose strength. It is the day strength finds its proper place. Nothing changes loudly in this moment, yet everything changes deeply. You walk forward without hurry. You listen without fear. You trust without defense. And from that place, God continues to act, not around you, but through you, in ways that do not need to announce themselves to be real.